get the camera get to where it will focus like it's supposed to. I want to talk about some critters, wires, heat resistance, some of the stuff you can do about it, and some of the surprising cost of what people want to help you with. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me move on. I'm doing a little dab of a recap on this pickup of mine. This is an '07 model F-150 I bought back in 2009 when it had 68,000 miles on it, and it's still in really good shape because I'm not harsh on my vehicles and I don't work them hard and I don't modify them too much. I just pretty well leave them like they are. I found out if you leave the vehicle like it is, it typically drives better than it does if you modify it a lot. I used to ask my students, I says, if you had one that was if you had two vehicles sitting there and neither one of them had been owned by but one person, all right, so both of them were one-owner vehicles, both of them were in good shape, but one of them had been heavily modded with wheels and different stereo system and all that kind of stuff. The other one was like factory and had never been touched, had the same wheels and same tire, and both of them had the same miles on them. Which one would you be the most likely to buy if you were paying the same price for both of them? And just about everybody I've ever asked that question says they buy the one that hasn't been modified because they, to begin with, even if they want mods, they want to do their own. Secondly, somebody else's mods aren't going to suit you. You don't know how well they did the wiring and stuff like that on their radio and all. And you would like to make sure that whenever you did it, you were working with a pristine vehicle. Anyway, that's basically how that is. I've had a few little problems with this truck. One of them, the speaker in the left door speaker quit working. And initially I thought that was a radio that I had put in there. But it turned out it wasn't the radio, it was the doggone wiring between the radio and the speaker, which really surprised me because I couldn't imagine what would have gone wrong with that because I hadn't really modified the wiring at all. I mean, I was assuming it was a problem with the radio or the wiring I had done, but it wasn't. It was part of the regular truck wiring. And then I had a problem with an instrument cluster that was killing the battery, and I had a problem with it was a real, threw me a curve because initially I discovered that the fuse box had something going on in it that was killing the battery, and then not long after that, about 6 weeks later, the instrument cluster started killing the battery, which was weird all the way around. Anyway, you might remember this situation here. The animals, squirrels, whatever they were, got under there, chewed up this, and chewed this wire off that went up to there. That was ground G103, which is really important. And it chewed that, which was G102. This was a horrible mess. I got in and my vehicle wouldn't even spin over, because the passive anti-theft wouldn't activate the starter because it wasn't talking to the engine controller. And here they are, this case ground, and all my power grounds were gone. I noticed whenever I was measuring voltage at the throttle body wires, when I should have been getting 5 volts on some of those wires, I was getting like 9 or 9.5. That sent me to look, and fortunately it was in this area here, and it was very easy to get that straightened out. And basically I fixed it that first time, and I taped the wires up and put it back like it was supposed to be and drove the truck for a while. That was in 2017. September 2019, round 2. The repair I had done previously was chewed up and messed up again. I actually happened to look in there and just see how it was doing, and it hadn't quite been chewed in two. The truck was still starting and all, but it was one strand of wire holding on there, so I had to go and work on it again. Okay, and right in this same area, which totally amazed me that they always went back to that same area. It's like the little rascal knew what they were up against. And so this was my little tool that I told you about before. It's I just basically got one of them silly hose clamps and put a couple of, but you could put a U of wire and do the same thing with a couple of alligator clips, solder them on there. You're going to need to use a torch to do that. But I soldered those on there, and then when this is holding those wires, you can make a really nice, neat solder joint that looks like that right there. And so that was, the repair that I did on that. And so I went ahead and got some of this rat poison because my previous thing of rat poison that I had put in there had been emptied. They had eaten all the rat poison out of it, but I guess the survivors came back and chewed on the wires anyway. But in this case, I put split loom on it and packed the split loom full of rat poison. I put rodent poison in there and down in there and all that. And that was 2019, and I haven't had any problems since then. All right, so if you want to get some rodent tape that will prevent that, it's got this pepper sauce in it and everything, you can buy this stuff here. Now this varies in price. This was one that was $113 for a roll of that tape, but you can also buy that same roll of tape from other sources for like 50 bucks. But that's a heck of a lot of money to pay for tape. And look, you can look at the product code on there, 20M, pound HON-4019, whatever. If you do that, you can buy that roll of tape. However, you can also do this cheaper alternative. You mix vegetable oil and some really, really, really hot sauce, like this is habanero. Mix it up and shake it up really, really, really good, and take and put it through a spray bottle and spray it on your wires. Now you remember you got to remember whenever you're working on it, after you've sprayed that stuff on your wires, you don't want to wipe your eyes after you've been touching it, or you're going to be in a mess. All right, but anyway, that's what I got to handle that. If I run into this problem again, I'll mix me up some of this hot sauce with a little bit of that oil and spray it all over my wires. And that will typically, from what everybody that I've ever talked to that's run into a problem like this they've had to try to solve, will tell you that hot sauce will keep them from wanting to chew on those wires so much, because it burns their mouth. Doesn't hurt them, they just don't rather not chew on it. All right, I got these, this IPA number 8080, these stainless steel twisted bore wire brushes. Those little rascals are really, really handy. Then you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they go up in size from the smaller one to the bigger one. You'd be surprised how many times you use those. And what I did here was I put one in my drill, and I used it for a battery. You can see the size of it. See, it's big enough to clean the battery terminal. So I, took my battery out. I cleaned the battery terminal real good. I always like to keep my battery terminals in good shape for any way I possibly can. And then I put some silicone dielectric grease around the base of that, because it has a tendency to keep that battery sulfuric acid, steam or whatever it is, from wicking up through there and messing up the terminals. And so basically I put some of that, they call it caliper grease, dielectric compound. It does a whole bunch of different jobs. Initially it was just marketed by Motorcraft to put on in spark plug wires and stuff like that, but then some smart aleck found out that it works really good for caliper sliding lubricant, so they put that on here too. You can buy that stuff. I've got a tube of it. I keep a tube of it all the time. Now dielectric grease is interesting because it does not have any conductive properties, but it's like an extra layer of insulation. Like I had told you, whenever you snap the plug wire on, if you put some of that in there, it makes sure that there's no sparks jumping anywhere except the spark is traveling where the metal's touching, instead of having little gaps here and there where the metal is making radio frequency interference. Because anywhere you've got a naked spark, even in a plug wire, you're going to have radio frequency interference. But anyway, after I put this back on, I get some silicone spray and I spray that on there. And so I've given it a sort of double whammy. It keeps the things from getting all chalked up again. So that keeps my battery terminal. These lead-free battery terminals, incidentally, whenever they get attacked by that chalky acid stuff that comes out of the battery, it just melts them darn things away and makes a terrible mess out of them. Now they sell these same kind of terminals that you can buy at the parts store. Unfortunately, sometimes it's very difficult to put those on your battery cables, specifically if the battery cables have got that same chalky stuff that's wicked up into the wires and all that. So you basically got to be pretty talented to replace one of those in a way that's going to make it, carry current the way it should. So it was fixed again. I basically, put that over here, and then that was the one that they had chewed that I caught in the act. This other one here was the big one going to the fuse panel inside the truck. This one doesn't have an underhood fuse panel. It's only got one in the right kick panel behind the dash, because this is just a basic truck. I was really proud of that truck when I found it, because it was you can see it's in beautiful shape and all that kind of, and it still is. It looks just like that even today. But now those ignition switches, I've seen these ignition switches, when you look under there and you see these cooked wires and these melted connectors and all that, it's time to replace the connector shell and the ignition switch. On Ford, back in the late 80s, there was a recall that came out in 96 because some of the late 80s Fords pickup trucks had ignition switches that were catching fire. They had a similar thing like this. Inside the ignition switch, they'd just start to get really hot, and then they would burst into flame. One time at the Ford place, I was standing over at the dispatch window, which I took a picture of that, and I looked over to my left, and up on the left there was an 87 or an 88 model F-150 that the front end alignment guy had up there, and he was over there he was in the parts room getting parts for it, and that thing had caught fire, the ignition switch had, and there were flames right in the middle of the dash and there above the steering wheel. There were flames licking out. It had already ruined the steering wheel. It was about to burn the truck down, and so we managed to let it down and put it out with a fire extinguisher, but a tremendous amount of work had to be done at Ford's expense because that recall hadn't been done. And you know, Ford didn't even admit there was a problem for a long time. Okay, so, all right, but anyway, I've seen a bunch of ignition switches like that, and some of the ignition switches on the later models in the early 90s that were different from this. You know, the switch would have a tendency to sort of stick in the start position because the grease would wear out inside the switch, and you could replace it. You know, people would say, my brake light stays on after I start the vehicle. Well, you could go in and just touch a key and it would click back to the on position. The brake light would go off because it was kind of sticking. And you know, you could try to lubricate it and all, but that's kind of silly because that switch don't cost that much. On the old pickups that use this kind of switch like I'm talking about here, that switch right there was only, if you bought one of the recall switches, they would only charge like $2.25 for that switch. I thought it was pretty amazing. A lot of them recall parts are super cheap because, you know, they're having to pay for them anyway. Blower inoperative, we ran into this on a van we worked on. She said, my blower doesn't work, and this was a blower relay, and the blower, this was one of those old GM blower relays, and it had started to develop resistance where these pins were, and, you know, snowballed out of whenever it develops resistance, it gets hot and begins to oxidize the terminals, and they get hotter and hotter and hotter. I've talked about that a bunch of times in here. And so you basically need to replace this and that relay altogether. If you just, a lot of the times I've seen people that when they didn't know how to change the pigtail or didn't want to fool with it, they put a relay on there and then they try to scrape them terminals out and plug it back on there and hope it be aight. These are the two terminals that operate the coil on the relay, and these are your load carrying terminals here. So this is basically just a 4-terminal relay on this one. Alright, these are easy mistakes to make whenever something's being built. This was on a brand new vehicle. It came with a trailer hitch put on it that somebody had put on there, or I can't remember if the customer had done this or how it came, but it seems to me like this was a brand new truck that was still on the lot, and some aftermarket outfit had put one on there. Incidentally, while I'm here, those Mark III conversion vans, I don't know how many of those you had to work on. They used to come in there, and you know the engine cover on those older Ford vans had these little bolts over here which you had to take loose, and you had to unclick these little things up here, and you pull the engine cover off, and you can get the back part of the engine work on it. Well, those Mark III vans, whenever they built those things, whoever was putting the carpet in there would run the carpet that was on the floor halfway up the engine cover, and then they would put this fancy little felt looking cover over that, and they were completely making it almost impossible to get to those bolts to get the engine cover off. And I got so irritated with those things that I had to actually take a box cutter knife and cut the carpet out of the way and all that to get in there, and when I put it back in there I'd have to modify it so it didn't look bad, but so that you could get in the doghouse without all that, the engine cover, we call it the doghouse. One day I was working on a brand new Mark III van that I had to pull the engine cover off of, and the guy that was driving it was standing there. For some reason or another, they would let some of the people stand in there and watch us work. And some people you don't really mind if they watch you work. Some of them, they get on your nerves. Have you ever noticed that? Some of them are just out there because they're friendly. Some of them are wanting to watch and see if you're going to do something wrong. I don't know. But, typically the dealership policy was if you're not covered by our insurance, you don't need to be in a shop. But a lot of times that's not enforced. In some places it's not. It depends on who's in charge. But anyway, this guy's standing here watching me work on his van. And so I says, let me show you something here. I didn't know who the guy was, but I knew he was the one driving that van I was working on. I said, let me show you how much trouble it is to get the engine cover off of this thing. I don't know what these Mark III people are thinking about when they put this carpet in here, but they make it a horrible situation to try to get these engine covers off anyway. And this guy was acting like what I was saying was making him mad, but he did see how much trouble I had to go to get the engine cover off that van. So I got the engine cover off, and I did the work I needed to do, and then I put it back in there, and I fixed it so it would, you know, fit in there easy, and whoever had worked on it next wouldn't have the problem I had. And so this guy, you know, he didn't say a word. He just sat there clenching his teeth and, you know, looking like a thundercloud. Anyway, whenever we got through, you know, we were all satisfied it was fixed. And I told the dispatcher, I said, that guy was a little ticked off when I was showing him how much trouble that doghouse was to pull off that van. He said, that guy is the CEO or one of the big boss men of Mark III vans. So that guy was actually one of the people that was in charge of the way that thing was being done. And did you know the next group of Mark III vans that came in there, the carpet was put in there in such a way that where the engine cover was a lot easier to get off, and they had stopped running it halfway up. I mean, it went on for a whole year model or two with us running the carpet halfway up until I had that conversation with that guy. I didn't even know who he was, but that made a difference apparently. Anyway, you'll see these wire harnesses being pinched like this. That's an easy mistake to make. You can put a cross member back in some of them if everything's all greasy and dirty under there. You know, you're liable to pinch a harness, so you got to be really careful with that, because you can wind up with a short. This is what you find on a visual inspection when you go looking for why it's blowing the fuse, you know. Then these nasty terminals, I actually should have put this slide right under that other one. This is the kind of hogwash that you run into sometimes where you've got a problem that's related to this connection, or even the battery is bad or something like that. Then you've got to deal with this. And it's a cable that's too short, and the cable snakes around and goes all over the place under there through a whole bunch of straps, making its way back to wherever it's going. And so it's really annoying to change. I like to pull the battery out, and I like to cut the cable off where it's nothing but really pretty clean copper, and then I'll take another piece of cable and I'll mesh it together with that, and then I'll get my little torch that I use, and I'll put a lot of rosin core solder and make a really good solid solder joint. And then I've got a nice piece of wire that's long enough where I can put a fresh battery terminal on there and get rid of this hogwash right here. Even if I use one of those lead-free battery terminals, you can buy those every day at the parts store. They don't cost that much. But if you're going to change a battery terminal, you need to change it in such a way where you're not making more problems for yourself later. All right. Why am I getting a wheel speed sensor code? I used to see this kind of thing all the time, particularly on trailer vehicles, but on vehicles that have been worked on a lot. People have unplugged and plugged these things together a lot, and they may have even checked, you know, right here for whatever reason when they were checking wires, and they'll cram something in there. I used to tell my students, I said, don't take a meter probe or something like a test light and shove it down in there so you spread that terminal, because it's not even making a connection. That was a horrible thing, and that would throw you a code. And so we run into stuff like this. Now, sometimes you may look at that and you cannot tell there is a problem with that pin fit. And in that case, now this one right here is one that you can buy on eBay or whatever, and it's got a whole bunch of different pins, but you're not gonna, it's really hard to come up with a kit. This has got a pin that will fit. You just got to make sure you're matching the pin as close as you can with the size pin that's supposed to go in there, because if you put one in there that's too big, you've made a problem by checking pin fit. They also have little kits that's got little terminals in there, you know, that you can hook your scope in and all that kind of thing. The problem with that is, one General Motors instructor said that if you unplug and plug some of these connectors 4 times, just unplug them, plug them back in 4 times, you're going to start having pin fit issues. Those pins are not as robust as they used to be. Although it kind of flips back and forth. Sometimes they seem to make them a little better, sometimes they don't. But see all the different pins on here, you just got to make sure that you're using one right size. Some people, if it's round pins, or sometimes even for these flat ones, they use a numbered drill bit, and they know exactly what size numbered drill bit will give them a accurate measurement of how that pin is fitting and all. You also need to pay attention to these. Typically on sensors, you won't typically have any scorched or burned wires like on that ignition switch, because there's no current flow in there. Not enough to heat the terminal up. I mean, there'll be a little bit. You can actually do a voltage drop test though between the signal return wire, which is your sensor wire, and the signal return wire on your engine controller, and sometimes you'll find a problem like that. I've run into stuff like that before. But anyway, that's a pin fit kit. I found that on eBay, and I just put the picture of it right here, so you can buy these pin fit kits all over the place, you know, Amazon and everywhere else. But you got to make sure that the ones that you're working on, you've got the proper pin, and they got those color coded and all that. Why do I have a misfire? Sometimes whenever these connectors are plugged back in, you might notice on a lot of your ABS modules, they've got that thing so that whenever you start that connector in there, it's got this little latch that pulls it in straight. And on the old Ford engine controllers, you had a bolt that would pull it in straight. And they've got ways of making sure that you go in there straight. Well, this one here, you just plugged it in there like that, and this student plugged that in and bent that pin pretty bad, and then it was misfiring on that cylinder because this is a coil. You know, it had 8 coils. It was a Chevy, if I remember right. Anyway, why am I having a misfire? And so it turned out everything, the only thing wrong all the way through was this got bent when he was putting it back in there. And a lot of times you can look and tell if there's something. Sometimes you'll get those rubber seals stacked so that it doesn't plug in good too, but that's not a pin fit issue, it's just a pin connection issue. But anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. Now this is a random photo of an old whisk broom I got hanging out in the garage, and I was thinking, wow, that is a cool old whisk broom there. Then I got to looking, you can buy a brand spanking new whisk broom just like that for about 10 bucks on Amazon. You know, so anyway, you're probably wondering, why is he showing us pictures of whisk brooms? Well, sometimes I do random stuff. All right, you might remember me showing you this picture last week of this bolt. That's what that looked like when I drove it up on that, that exhaust bolt. I hammered it up on there. Now, don't get confused into thinking that this wire is trapped under that bolt, because it's not. It's running behind it. But I put an extension in there and I air hammered that on there, and managed to get that bolt screwed out of there. So anyway, I just wanted to show you what that looked like on the vehicle when I did it. I ran across that. Now, fusible links are not quite so much a thing of the past as we might think they are, because there's some of the vehicles, Asian vehicles and other ones alike, will use fusible links. They like to use this post on the starter that's connected to the battery wire as a junction post. Now, some of the GM vehicles used to have junction posts that were mounted, insulated from the frame on various different places. They'd have something like that. In other words, they have a battery post terminal going over here, and they have another, fusible links coming off of it. Fusible links are different from fuses because they can take a lot more power surge. If it's a dead short and there's a tremendous amount of current there, it's going to pop that fusible link, and the fusible link is always smaller than the wire it's protecting, and it's a special kind of silver wire that's got platinum in it or something. I never have researched to see what kind of wire that was. Some of you guys will probably send me a message and say, well, this wire is exactly this, alloy or whatever. But you can see on the schematic, and this right here is a later model GM, it's got fusible links right here coming off the starter solenoid post. That's just like that right there. That is very common. Now, your old Chevys, like in the 70s, for some odd reason, they would have a fusible link going to the starter solenoid wire. That's the one that gets hot when you turn it to start. And I had one of those and those would fail without warning even when there was no problem. I mean, I had run into that out in Texas on my way to Muleshoe, Texas. And I was going out there, me and my mother were going out there back in the late 70s to go see the Grand Canyon or whatever. And we had one that burned out a fusible link on that, and I had to get it fixed out there on the road. I talked about that one time before, I think. The fan motor, sometimes whenever something like a fan motor fails, and this was a completely failed fan motor that wouldn't run at all under any circumstances. And this wasn't one of the ones where you turn the fan through and the commutator goes dark periodically. This was one that had a cold solder joint right there. Now, to be perfectly honest, I probably could have resoldered that and put it back in. But whenever you're doing something that's related to engine overheating, if you fix the fan, you put it back on there, and the engine overheats, and it turns out that solder joint has gone cold again for whatever, or opened up, then you aren't doing yourself any favors, because they're going to try to blame it on you if they had an overheating problem that destroyed their vehicle. But if you put a fan motor on from the parts store and it fails, then it's on the parts store, you see. That's how that kind of thing works. But anyway, I just pull that one apart to see, there's your commutator right there, and your brushes are in there. But that cold solder joint right there was what I found wrong with that one, where it may have just overheated and melted the solder off there or whatever. Now the sun battery test, you're supposed to do this loaded and charging. You put a load on it, take your first reading, turn it off. Put your wires back in there, and you're putting it in the water. You're going to start out by putting it in the water, not touching the plates, but putting it in the water and touching it to the post. And you start and you go over. Now I may have these two reversed, but they're always, when you add that one and that one together, it's always going to be real close to one of those. Now, during your loaded and charging test, you're going to put the charger on, take your measurement, turn off the charger. You don't want to keep the charger or the load on it the whole time you're taking all these measurements, because you're going to skew your readings. So if there is more than 1/10 of a volt difference between any of these, according to the sun battery test, that is supposed to be, the battery is supposed to be replaced. That gives you something that you can use as a go, no-go test if you're saying, well, according to the sun battery test, even if, you got your hydrometer test, you can check the cold cranking amps, you can load it to half the cold cranking amps, and then have it to see if it goes below 9.6 volts. You can hold your gas pedal all the way to the floor if it's one of those that's got clear flood mode, and spin it for 15 seconds watching your voltage to see if it goes below 9.6. If it stays above 9.6, the battery's okay for that particular vehicle. But anyway, this is just one of the tests. I learned about this test when I went to Mazda school in Jacksonville, Florida back in 1983. Okay, so that's a pretty cool test, and I used to have my students do this test. I'd have a bunch of batteries out there, some bad and some good, and I'd have them put on their safety glasses and all that. Incidentally, when you're jumping a car off, always have some safety glasses with your jumper cables, because there ain't no use in having it ruin your whole day. I've had batteries blow up while I was working on it to scare the living daylights out of you. My buddy Donnie said that one blew up whenever he was working on it, and he remembers in slow motion seeing jagged pieces of plastic going past his head on both sides. So cover up your eyes, because it's better to be safe than sorry on all that. Don't work on batteries without safety glasses on. Good grief. One small breach right there. There was somebody that mounted a cell phone. They got that one too, you can tell. But you can see a little bit of copper, and the screw threads, when the guy went right through that wire harness. This one was the one going to the fuel pump. So when they put that, that's back in the days when they used to put cell phones in the vehicle, and bolt it to the inside of the car and all. That cell phone installation right there destroyed, well, it didn't destroy anything other than it just breached that wire, and that was a short to ground because he was going into the transmission tunnel. So that's what I found wrong with that one right there. That caused it was a no start right after they put the phone in it, and they didn't know why, and it was popping fuses for the fuel pump, and that's where we, that's what I wound up. I could go into detail about how I found it, but I think I've already told that story. Now I like to revisit my terminal reattachment method. When you got these little terminals right here, and the terminal's in good shape, except that basically the wires have broke loose. It was originally crimped right here, and that wire was coming through this seal and going up in there, and that wire, whenever it breaks off because of the wire being bent a lot, you can fix that. If you do it right, you can fix it where it'll go right back in the connector where it's supposed to go and click right back in there. Of course, you need the tools to release it too. Sometimes there'll be a little colorful wedge that comes out so that you can release it very easily. Anyway, what I would do is I would strip that wire back just about the right length, and then I would bend these tabs over that seal, because I want that seal to be there, and then I would lay that really close to this. And that's a very small terminal I'm showing there. And then after I soldered it, it looked like that. See, so this is soldered. This is not, it's not interfering with here. Now don't have this terminal like that with this lower than that, because sometimes if you do that, you'll wind up with solder working its way up in here, and then the stupid terminal won't plug in. So be really particular about that. I've also run into situations where there was nothing wrong with the crimp. It looked nice and clean, but it was on a sensor and I had voltage deflection, and I would actually solder that without doing anything else other than soldering that crimp, and I've fixed problems on vehicles by soldering the crimp. But anyway, this is actually putting the terminal back on. You know, sometimes you don't have to. I always want everything to be as factory as I can possibly make it. So when I plug it back in there, I want people to come and look at it and not know that anybody had been there, and I want it to work just like it was brand new. This right here was a '68 Chevelle I saw yesterday sitting out there getting worked on under the hood. My wife had a '69 Chevelle that she got brand new and had 396 and a 3 in the floor. You know, back in those days, a lot of them just had 3-speed in the floor, you know, instead of a 3 on the tree. But that was a pretty cool car. It had smoke mags and all that. Now, I will tell you, I had to work on this picture because when I took the picture, it wasn't a very good picture. It was kind of, the picture was crooked and my radio antenna was in the way, and I basically had to, you know, do a bunch of work, and then I turned it into a watercolor and all that. But anyway, that was just what I saw yesterday. I thought that was pretty cool. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And if I can see my way clear and I have time, I'm going to put another one of those practice tests on the on you know, it's a little quiet when it just plays through, and then it gives you the answer like I did last week. A lot of people seem like they enjoyed that. But let me know what you thought of this one, and if you learned anything, or if you have anything to share that where you've had similar experiences. And I really appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you next time.